Welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deanna. Today I am working on promised video about painting onto your wool. Doing patterns with squirt bottles, super easy technique, but sometimes it's good to just watch something as easy and intuitive as it is and take some little tips off of it so yours can come out even better. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be decorating fabric like I did with my Klimt pattern this month. A lot of people wrote and asked how that was done. It's done so easily. You're going to see how to do it right now. There's no secrets. I'm doing it with these squirt bottles that I buy off Amazon. So these are usually called hairdresser squirt bottles, just plain squirt bottles. You want to be careful to get a bottle that can deal with heat. When I'm finding bottles on Amazon that are called hairdresser squirt bottles, those being the tag words, they will be able to handle the heat. Don't get something at the dollar store that's a hard, thick plastic, like plastic, because when the hot water goes into it, it'll shrivel into itself, like implode, and shoot dye and boiling liquid all over the place. So make sure you get ones that can handle heat. It's hard to know that, but again, when it says hairdresser bottle, these that are coming off Amazon, whether they've got the black cap or the red cap, they can handle the heat. So these are the ones that I use. I buy them in packs of about 20, 25 for maybe $15. So they're well under $1 a bottle. And of course you can reuse them too. So what I'm going to do here to get started, and again, this is so simple. I'm just going to get my wool ready first. Now underneath here, I've got a white enamel pan. It's not perfectly clean. It's pretty stained, but you know, you can use anything. You can use a casserole dish. You can use a disposable casserole dish. The thing is, when you're painting, this pan fits in my oven. So it's big, but it exactly fits in my oven. It wouldn't fit in another oven. I looked for the pan that's designated for dyeing. You're not mixing it with your food. You're going to poison yourself, arsenic and Olay style. You want the biggest pan that fits in your oven, because with painting, you want to do a nice big piece, but you're not crumpling it up like you're doing casserole dye. So what I'm going to do with this piece, I've already nicked it here on the edge. And I'm only going to do half of it just like this. Now let me tell you, normally when we dye fabric, we always put it soaking in Synthrapol or jet dry or some kind of an accelerator first. I didn't with my last set for the Klimt kit, and I'm not going to with this one. This is door wool straight off the bolt. It just arrived this morning, and I'm putting it here like this. This has not been soaked in Synthrapol. I'm going to do this one this way, and the next one, the other half that I just ripped off, I am going to put into the water. And I'm going to do that one too and show you the result. So this is how it's going to work this time around. And then we'll break and I'll show you the result doing it with Synthrapol. I'm going to have all my little bottles ready here. And what I've done with my bottles is I've gotten my dyes that I love. These are chemical dyes that we're talking about. And I will put, when I'm prepping all these bottles, a little bit of powder into the bottle. Then I'm heating up my kettle. It's great if you can use a funnel or something like that, but you're basically going like this, leaning against the thing. This isn't hot water, and pouring it in, hot water in the kettle. And then you always have to make sure that the metal part of the bottle is gone. You see how there's like the metal sticker in there? You want to pry that out with your finger or with a tool. That needs to come out before you put dye in. Otherwise, you got a messy situation going. So that would come out. I'd pour my water in with the dye, put the cap in. I usually take the top off. And for me, I put this in the freezer for a while with dye in it. The reason I do that is because it's hot. You just can't touch it at all. You can't touch this part when it's filled with hot water. It's terribly painful. It's super hot. But I put them in the freezer. And be careful, because if you forget them, they will freeze and they will reactivate. You can use them if you forget them, and a week later you realize there's a bunch of hairdresser bottles of dye. So I fill these with the colors that I want, and I usually label them with a Sharpie, and then I put them in these containers and I wait until I'm ready to use them. And when they're empty, I clean them with dishwashing soap, I empty them, and when I'm ready, I fill them up again with another color. Sometimes when I'm dyeing with big pans and I have a lot of color left over and it's such a shame, I just pour it into these bottles and save it for another time. So these bottles are super handy. Now when I'm doing a project like this where I'm hand painting, I'm just going to be doing designs directly, I'll start over here, directly onto the wool. Again, this one is not soaked. and I'm going to choose what colors I want. So I'm going to put my wool away, and I'm going to get out my paper towel, and then I just go through my bottles, because you end up getting a big collection like this going, and you forget what colors are what, even when the label is on there. So I just go through and I give a little squirt, and it reminds me, I think that's tobacco leaf, and I like that one, and I'm going to use that one. And you know, sometimes you have one that looks red and it's more brown than you think, or it's brown and it's actually black, or you think it's black and it's purple. Just give it a test on a paper towel so you know that you're using colors that you mean to use and want to use. Now, you don't want to use these bottles straight from the heat of being filled. And the reason is, the main reason I put them into the freezer is so I can handle them and they're not hot. These are not hot at all. I made these months ago, these colors, or weeks ago. But the thing is, if this were hot, because of pressure and science, as soon as I tip it over, the heat inside the bottle is going to want to spray all over the place. And it only has this little tip to come out. And that is why I don't do any painting with bottles of hot water. If it's hot at all, I don't, because it'll go tss and go right across your kitchen onto the white curtains. So you don't want to do that. Make sure that when you are painting, your bottles are completely cold. Ice cold, not ice cold, but room temperature. So literally what I'm going to do now is use the tip like a ballpoint pen and literally just draw. Now you will see, you can go backward like this. Buttons the dog, see someone outside. You can go backwards like this if you want to be perfect. I'm literally drawing with the tip of this thing, which is very fine, my little hairdressing bottle. Now, do you see how it's beading? It's making beads here. The reason it's doing that is because the fabric is not wet, so it cannot absorb. I'm going to pause for a minute and let Buttons the dog out. Pause. Welcome back. So I'm going to do the same thing over here, and I'm just going to continue my design. I'm doing a similar design to what I did with the Klimt because I want people to get similar types of sheets of wool to play with. And I'm literally going to fool like this until I'm done with my drawing. Now, again, it will do this high beading thing because the wool is perfectly dry. It doesn't want to absorb. Now, wouldn't you think that this would be really problematic when you put it into the oven? No, it'll sink right in and it'll dye beautifully. The thing that you need to worry about doing this technique exactly the way that I'm doing it is that you bump something or it all starts to drip. You're still going to get a beautiful piece of hand-painted wool, and it's still going to do great in the oven, and it's not going to make a huge bit of difference, but it will change your design. And you know, at the end of the day, you're cutting it into strips anyway, or maybe you're using it for prati and some of it you're using whole. But at the end of the day, as far as using it, it's not going to make any difference if you bump it, unless it bothers you or unless you're selling it and you want it to be pretty perfect. You can do connecting stuff like this too. You could do polka dots. When I get giant beads like this, I try to drag it the other way. You know, it's just for fun. You can see it almost looks like stained glass. If you get real close, it's real sort of iridescent. It almost looks like stained glass the way the colors blend. And it's super easy to paint. It's also something kids could do. And, you know, you could also do this. I'm doing this on white fabric right out of the container. But you could equally do it on under-dyed fabric. I could have dyed this any color I wanted it to and then painted it. So I'm going to keep going on this for a little while, and then I'm going to show you me putting it into the oven so carefully so it stays looking like this, and then we'll watch it sort of at intermittent points as it starts to melt and soak into the fabric. So this is part one, painting on a piece of wool that has not been pre-soaked. So let's see how this goes. I'll be right back to you. Now, one of the little things that can happen is you can get globs like this going. So one of your choices when you have that is to do this and pick it up that way. You can pick the whole thing up by doing that, or get a bottle that's empty or almost empty, squirt it out to exhale, and then squirt it in to collect a large amount. So again, you squirt it out to exhale, and you want to be careful where you're doing that. And then if you have large concentrations, you can pick them up like that, and then use them later, like this. Because again, you're probably going to be cutting this up into wool strips. So when you get these big globs, you know that you can pick them up by doing the reverse squeeze in on the tube and then use them later on, or just dab the corner of your paper towel to it and it'll come up that way. But you can't worry too much about globs and things, because when you're using the wool and it is not wet and it can't absorb, it is going to do this beading. It's going to be a blessing. See, I did that without dabbing it. It made some little dots. It's going to be a blessing and a curse to do it without the fabric being wet, because without the fabric being wet, it does this great beading thing, which gives you a great effect, as you'll see. So it's the gives and the takes. And we'll be back in just a minute. In little bits and bobs in the centers. When I get too close to the edge, you'll figure this out as you go along, it starts to drip in and make big pools. So my plan of attack is to just fill in the middle the way that I want the middle, and then let it soak in the oven, let the dye start taking and setting with the heat, and then I'll pull it out again and I'll do the edges and fill in the edges. Because my piece is just a little too big for this, and you can see how it would want to, that's good for now, how it would want to all sort of glob in the center. So I'm going to put it like this. Make sure your ends are up a little bit. You don't want them hanging over. And we can deal with the edges later. And I'm going to go pretty, ooh, you know what? Yep, I can do like this. Pretty easy does it. Keeping it really steady. And let's see how that goes. So let's see how it's going in here. Oh, it looks like it's going real well. My glasses just fogged up. So this looks great. Now you don't want to leave it too long because it'll want to stick to the bottom. See, it hasn't done that. But when it stays in there too long and there's any kind of moisture, you get like this brown glue. It just glues itself to the bottom. It's the wool burning, so that's no good. But as you can see, this went really well. If you want to do a close-up there, it looks really good. It's very dry. You see all the beading just turned into lines. Some of it did this great sort of 1950s atomic business. So I'm going to pull it out to this. Oh, it burnt a little bit here. See, that's it burning because it bent over the side. I'll cover that with some dye so I can still use that part. I'm going to do the edges. Oh, that pan is hot. I'm going to do the edges, and then I'm going to get this pan back on the table, and I'm going to take my piece of wool that's soaked and paint on that one so you can see the difference. I'm going to be doing that next. So here I am. I've got my piece that has been pre-soaked with Synthrapol. It's been in the water for a half an hour. It's had Synthrapol. I wrung it out and it's just damp. And this is that piece. So for example, let me show you. I want to switch my colors up a little bit. This is how different it is to work with something that's already damp. There's not going to be any beading. You're going to get a much sort of straighter, easier line, but as you can see, it's going to be a blurred line, and it's going to become even a little more blurred when it goes into the oven. So it goes without being said, but I'm going to say it anyway in the hopes that I'm not being patronizing. The more wet that it is, mine is just damp, the more wet it is, the more it's going to immediately bleed. The more dry it is, the less it's going to bleed. So you need to keep that idea in your mind as you go along doing your colors. You want to be really careful when it's wet because it will bleed into the color next to it, and you may not want it to because it may not match. With chemical dyes, too, you need to be thinking about the color might break, unlike with natural dyes. It might break down into other colors. You might be using brown and then get bursts of cobalt blue. That's part of the beauty of using chemical dyes. At the same time, when you're working on something that's already wet, it will activate the dye, your wet wool, in a way that when I was doing it on completely dry, untreated wool, it wasn't activated at all. So these are two very different techniques. They both work great. You can see the gorgeous color I'm getting. You can do all kinds of fun stuff. You get more of a feel for what it's going to look like here. But this is like watercolor or pastel as opposed to oils. The other one had a bit more control, except for the beading and the spilling in. This has a little bit less control, although it feels that you have less control over the way that the colors are getting together quickly because they're traveling quickly through the wet cloth. But at the same time, you have more control over your utensil, your hairdressing bottle. By the way, these bottles are nice too. If you see that style come up on Amazon, that's good too. That's not one that's gonna implode on itself and create mayhem. So this works great too. This works a lot faster when your wool is not wet at all, like my first time. The tips, particularly the sharp tips, less this style, the sharp tips are going to snag often on your wool when it's dry. When it's wet, that's just one more thing that doesn't happen. So that's part of the deciding factor for you, I think, is how it handles while you're doing it, but also how it comes out. So I'll finish up this piece, I'll put it in the oven, and in a few minutes I'll show you how this piece that was pre-wetted and had Synthrapol, had soaked in Synthrapol, how this worked in comparison to our first piece. So big day of dyeing here. It's evening already. I did quite a lot of different things. This is the first one I showed you, so that's how that one came out, looking like a scarf. Now remember, this is the one that was done completely dry, not soaked, no Synthrapol, nothing like that. And just lots of stripies that looked heavily beaded that actually turned into just nice even lines, just dragging the tip across, drawing, doodling, right? That kind of thing. And then these also, same way, these are both designs that I have in the Klimt set. So just dragging it across and letting it bead as I go. These three also done on Synthrapol dry. So those are the dry ones there. Let me just fold them out so we can look at them later. Now, in contrast, this is the first one that I did that was all wet. So it was damp. It had been soaking in Synthrapol. And you know what I did here? This is kind of a double because it was all watercolored. And then you see these little black chicken scratchings in here, all these little lines. That I did dry after. So this is a combo. So it was soaked. I did all of the colors, and then everything that you can see that's black, I did it the same way, just using that tip of the one with black inside, making little dots and sort of pronouncing and popping stuff a bit better. So this one was a combo of both, which is kind of fun. Why not? So I let this one do its thing in the oven with the color. And then once it came out of the oven, it was dry. And then I just put it back on the pan with the black and just added some lines. And at that point, I got real crisp stuff like this on here on top of the watercolor. So that was that one. And then the last three that I did, these are still damp. These are just watercolor. But you know what I did? I did them with watercolory colors, same way it was wet. And then I over dyed. So I had it with a white background, just like these, but then I put it in a color called, I think, Valentine Blush. It's a Dharma color. And I colored the background. So I dyed it after. And I think it really mellowed it out, made it look really nice as a unit, all these triangles. This one, same thing. This is one that I did lots of coloring on, kind of faded away a little bit. I did some light coloring and some outlining in black and very watercolory. Then I put it into Cushing's Mummy Brown, and it kind of faded and mellowed quite a bit. It was a bit too harsh for me, this one, so I let that one mellow quite a bit. But you can see there's still a lot of colors there. And the last one I did was this one. You can see it better on, I think that's the finished side, but you can see it better here. All these kinds of circles I did. And again, I did the stripes and I did some circle shapes. And then I dropped it into Pro-Chem Mallard Green. So then I over dyed that. So I did 3 over dye jobs right here with the watercolor base. I did this one, which was a watercolor base, and then I drew on top of it. And then I did the original 2 with no soaking, just straight onto the material. So you see the kind of variety that you can get just doing really simple things with these little bottles. You know, you really can't make a mistake, because when you think about it, once I cut these up and use them like I did in my Klimt piece, you're not seeing a lot of the pattern. If you're doing a project and you're leaving big leafy bits, you see a little bit more of the pattern, but you know that the pattern is there, and it's going to add the kind of color, just like a tweed or a plaid would. It's going to add a kind of color and quality that is unique, like a paisley shawl, right? Something that's unique that you can't get with a solid material or a modeled material or a casserole dye. It's going to add another dimension of something extra. Here's one more peek at these little guys. So I hope that was helpful. helpful. It's such a creative thing to do, to get the squirt bottles out and just go for it. And you can under dye and then color on top, or you can do the techniques that I just did, dry or wet first and then drop it in dye if you want to kind of marry it or unify it with one color behind. But whatever you choose, it's going to be super fun and super easy, and even something that kids can do. So I hope this is a technique that you can take with you and have lots of play with and really enjoy. I will see you next time at Ribbon Candy Hooking.